Good morning, everyone. My name is Brad Hibbs. I'm the Director of Operations at the SQL Group. Welcome to today's executive brief. We're delighted to have you with us. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be made available to the public upon completion of the webinar. In today's financial services landscape, your SQL Server infrastructure is more than just a technology platform. It's the backbone of customer trust, regulatory compliance, and operational resilience. Yet many institutions continue to operate with database environments that quietly increase risk and limit growth potential. This session introduces the SQL Server Maturity Curve, a strategic framework that designed to help financial leaders move from reactive, risk-prone management toward a proactive, business-enabling data platform. Over the next hour, we'll explore how your organization can assess its current maturity level, identify critical gaps, and develop a roadmap that strengthens compliance, enhances performance, and drives measurable financial impact. You'll gain insight into the 4 stages of SQL Server maturity, from reactive to strategic, how database maturity directly influences cost, compliance, and operational resilience, and actionable strategies for building a sustainable, secure, and high-performing data environment. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Joe Webb, founder and managing partner of the SQL Group. Joe is a recognized authority on SQL Server performance and security. He's an 8-time Microsoft Most Valuable Professional award recipient, author of 4 books, and a frequent speaker at technology conferences across North America as well as Europe. He also served on the board of directors for the Professional Association of SQL Server, helping to shape the global data platform community. Under Joe's leadership, the SQL Group partners with financial institutions as well as healthcare organizations nationwide to deliver compliance-ready, high-performing SQL Server environments without the cost and complexity of full-time DBA staff. Please join me in welcoming Joe Webb. Joe, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Brad. First off, I appreciate everyone carving some time out of your busy day to join us. As we kick off, what I would like is for you to think for a few minutes about some of the critical data systems that you have in your bank. Obviously, there's the core banking system, there's the payment systems, ACH, credit cards, etc. Maybe you have some loans, both origination and servicing components of it. Maybe you have some data warehousing or risk and compliance reporting systems. A lot of banks have fintech integrations that touch their data systems. And so I'm sure there are a bunch of others. All of those, you would probably agree with me, are critical to core banking operations. Now I want to ask you to think for a minute about the way you take care of those data systems, the way you protect them, the way you make sure that they're healthy and that they're reliable and that they're secure. Does that level of attention that you're currently providing match the level of criticality those SQL servers have within your organization? For a lot of banks I talk with, the answer is just no. They're not giving it the attention that it deserves, and that bothers them a lot. So today what I want to do is share with you some ways to gain some visibility into your current SQL environment. We call it the SQL Server Maturity Curve, and it'll help you identify where your institution is today. And we'll also outline some practical steps that you can take to move to a more secure, more resilient, and more compliant environment. Now, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to make it easy. We're going to send you a copy of this slide deck afterwards, so you'll have the notes there. You'll also get a link to the recording, as Brad mentioned during the introduction. I'm also going to give you a link that allows you to download the SQL Server Maturity Curve checklist, so it'll help you identify where you are and the steps that you need to check off in order to get to the next level within the maturity curve. So, as we go through today, on Teams, there's a Q&A. button that you can use. Feel free to type in questions along the way, and we will answer those either as they come up or towards the end, depending on the flow. I also want to make this as interactive as possible, given the webinar format. And so I'm going to have a few polls that you can that I'd ask that you participate in. It's completely anonymous. No one's going to see the results. I can't tell who answered what, but you'll need your cell phone so that you can scan a QR code. So let's start with a poll just to kick off and have some insight into how this works. I'd like to know a little bit more about your expectations for this session. So if you would, just scan that QR code to participate in this short survey. We'll see the answers pop up here in real time. We'll do a couple more along the way. But the first question is, there are a lot of facets to a mature SQL Server environment. There's the performance and availability, data security and privacy, auditing and monitoring, backups, and recovery standards that meet your RTOs and RPOs. And then another one is staffing and governance issues. So I'd like to know which one of these today is at the forefront of your mind. Okay. Looks like we're getting an even split. Performance and availability is a concern. Obviously, all of these are important. But as we'll talk a little bit later, we're not able to address them all at one time often. And so really what we want to kind of understand is which ones are the most important to you or concerns you the most right now. So performance and availability, data security, privacy, backups and recovery standards, staffing and governance issues, auditing and monitoring capabilities. Okay. Performance and availability seems to be the one that most people are concerned with. You know, as I chat with a lot of the banking IT leaders that I talk with, one thing that I hear over and over again is that they just don't know what they don't know, and that bothers them. It's not that things are broken necessarily, it's that they're uncertain about the status of things. Often they've had multiple vendors in there over the years, or internal staff that have come and gone, perhaps some outside consultants that have been employed there or come in to make changes to their SQL servers over the years. And now there's this sense of unease around the SQL environment. They're not sure how everything's configured. They don't know if shortcuts were taken along the way to get things up and running quickly. And as an example, they may have been told that, yeah, we've got backups covered, but nobody's ever really done a verification to make sure that those backups are actually going to meet their RTOs and RPOs, right? How long might a recovery take, and how much data could be lost during that recovery? And so while a lot of those organizations haven't experienced a major outage recently, which is good, don't get me wrong, that's good, but it also means that there hasn't been an urgency for making things better yet, for addressing some of these lingering concerns. And so they have this in the back of their mind, that question of, okay, nothing's happened yet, but when's the shoe going to drop? And if it does, how bad is this going to be? So let's talk a little bit about the cost of downtime to start with. There are a lot of facets to an immature, a lot of costs to an immature SQL environment. But let's talk a little bit about the downtime, because everybody can relate to that. So let's look at a few statistics to start with. According to a 2024 study from Splunk and Oxford Economics, financial institutions lose an average of $152 million a year because of downtime. And that downtime's typically not just a little 5-minute blip because a router needed to be rebooted or something. The Uptime Institute found that 30% of the reported outages lasted at least 24 hours. Now, here's the part that really kind of struck home with me and that really stings. About 40% of those outages were caused by human error. That's a misconfiguration setting, an overlooked alert, maybe a mistake was made by somebody experienced, but maybe not in SQL, or maybe it was a really busy person and they were overworked. We've all seen that this sort of thing can happen. So I don't want to get too deep into the case studies, but there are a ton of examples out there. For example, Barclays earlier this year, back in January, Barclays had a 3-day outage that caused half of all of their payments, millions of customers affected, to fail. The bank ended up having to pay somewhere between £5 and £7.5 million as a result of that outage. And that was on top of the outage that they had in July of 2023, when a routine system update, again, there's that human error comes in again, went wrong and took down online banking, mobile apps, credit card transactions for several hours. So twice in the matter of about 2.5 years, Barclays experienced serious outage issues. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other examples. There one from about a year ago with, the one back in May, I think it was, where Fiserv had some issues that rippled through dozens of their clients, where online banking, Zelle, ACH, direct deposits, all those things went offline for a while. And Bank of America, like I said a moment ago, back in October, about a year ago, experienced an outage where credit card transactions were showing, but account balances were zero. And that was a major issue. So all this to say that outages are expensive. They can be disruptive. They're damaging the trust, and they cause a lot of overtime and work and within the IT organization to make things right. So as I've spoken with a number of banks throughout the U.S. And their senior leadership, I hear a lot of the same challenges come up when it comes to managing their SQL environment. First one that comes up a lot is an aging infrastructure. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a financial institution and learned that their core banking system or other critical systems are still running on a really old version of SQL Server. And unfortunately, the mindset has been, if it's not broken, don't fix it. We've just left it alone for now. But those older versions can become, and the older hardware can become liabilities, right? They create security risks. They raise eyebrows from regulators and examiners, auditors. So that is a problem. Another problem is that reactive mode that so many banks are in. They kind of take a hands-off approach to their SQL environment. They don't touch it unless absolutely necessary. And so as a result, issues only get attention once they've become a disruption, right? And when you're always reacting to challenges, then it becomes really difficult to get ahead on other areas like predictability and resilience. Third challenge is a skills gap. Many of the community banks, particularly, or even state and regional banks, just don't have a dedicated database administrator. They don't have a dedicated SQL Server person. Instead, they've got a really busy, really smart, but busy IT generalist who's doing their best to cover everything. And finally, just the complexity of financial services these days. Fintech integrations, loan platforms, all of these things are plugging in. Marketing platforms are plugging into the SQL Server data infrastructure. And that's causing additional strain and complexity, and things begin to feel fragile within that infrastructure. So first several slides here kind of painting a grim picture, but the good news is that there's a path forward. There's a way to go from these levels of concerns into a more structured, mature environment. We do that with what we call the SQL Server Maturity Curve. So really, I'm going to spend just a few minutes chatting about the way we can evaluate risk and resilience of a SQL infrastructure. So it's a straightforward framework that'll help you figure out where you are today and what it takes to move you from where you are to where you want to be. Now, there are 4 levels within this maturity curve. There's the reactive stage, there's the managed stage, there's the optimized stage, and then there's the strategic stage. And so we'll walk through each one of these briefly, and then we'll talk about what it takes to move you from where you are to where you want to be. So at the reactive stage, that's the lowest level in the maturity curve. This is where SQL environments are managed in more of a break-fix mode, right? Something goes wrong, an outage happens, a performance issue crops up, maybe an examiner has flagged something as a problem, and your team jumps in to fix it, right? But the problem is it usually catches them by surprise, right? They're always in this reactive mode, always in this break-fix mode. And instead of spending some time figuring out how to prevent them. It's also typically a very manual processing, right? They take backups, but there's very little automation in place. Maybe there's some monitoring, which is good, but often what we've seen is that monitoring is really not something specific to SQL Server. It may be like SolarWinds Orion or something. So it's just monitoring the basics of network and the basics of infrastructure like low disk space, but it really doesn't provide a clear picture of the health or the reliability or even the security of the SQL environment. So another indicator here is also that usually there's not one person truly accountable for the SQL environment. It's kind of a shared responsibility, which means no one is dedicated or tasked with watching it. And it's often lumped in with all the other infrastructure servers, all the other networking devices. It just happens to be part of a much broader portfolio of things that the IT generalist is tasked with. Now, from a business perspective, this leads to a lot of operational cost, a lot of regulatory findings, and a lot of time and money spent fixing things instead of preventing them. A lot of banks are still operating in this reactive mode currently. Now, as we move up the curve a little bit, we get to managed. That's where banks start putting some structure in place. That's where we begin looking at some consistency. Things like backups are running. And of course, you're going to say, of course, backups are running. Everybody was running backups. But you'd be surprised at how often we hear that backups are running only to find that something's very, very different when we dig in and do a SQL health check for a client. In many cases, backups are running, but they can't actually be used to restore as the bank needs them to. So anyway, backups are running. Banks begin at this stage to address a couple of the 3 areas. You've probably heard of, the phrase people, processes, and technology. At this stage, banks are making a solid progress on the process portion and the technology portion. And they may have identified one person who knows a little bit more about SQL than the rest of their team. But there's still more of a shared responsibility, or that person's doing it in their spare time. But things overall in this stage are better than they are in the reactive mode. A lot of the budget is still going towards break fix or some maintenance, but it's better than just on the firefighting mode. The third stage is the optimized stage, and that's where things look and begin feeling different, right? That's where banks are no longer spending a lot of their time just keeping the lights on, but the focus is shifting from maintenance into efficiency. So routine tasks like backups and test restores from those backups, the integrity checks from those backups are all happening on a automated basis. There's standardization across all of the different SQL servers in the environment. So the team's not having to reinvent or troubleshoot as much because every system is different. All the builds are becoming standardized. All of the maintenance plans across those are becoming standardized, and we're seeing less maintenance having to be done as a result. Here, performance is proactively monitored and addressed. That was some of the concerns that first poll showed, performance and reliability. So here we're proactively looking at the indexes and the queries and the resource usage on a regular basis so that we can help identify potential issues before those issues are felt by customers, either internally or externally. And all of this optimization begins to pay off, right? So banks at this stage begin saving money because they're right-sizing their environment. They're able to scale down through optimization or consolidation. They're able to scale down and reduce their SQL estate. They're able to reduce the hardware and software licensing costs that they have. For example, one client that we work with just earlier this year, we worked with them on finding some optimization within their SQL environment, and they were able to save about $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year on their Azure spend for just one of their SQL servers, simply by tuning and optimizing the workload within that environment. So banks at this stage begin to optimize and begin to reduce costs. The fourth stage is strategic. And here's where your SQL environment becomes more of a business enabler, right? It's not just stable and secure anymore, but now we're transitioning it into a more resilient. So we've got high availability in place. We've got disaster recovery plans that are documented and practiced and refined on a regular basis. Security is strong and consistent. Here's where we begin looking at deep monitoring and auditing tools, and there's clear separation of duties within the IT organization. We're begin looking at workloads are being addressed so that reporting workloads maybe are offloaded from the primary transactional server. But it's not all about just reducing costs and avoiding risks. Here we provide that foundation where IT can become more of a business enabler rather than just a cost center. And so we're looking at efficiency and innovation and growth. Right. And so as an example, I talked about, some of the resiliencies. Another client that we worked with a couple of years ago now, they wanted some high availability solutions set up. And so we were able to work with their IT team to set up high availability within their organization. Now, unfortunately, not long after that availability was set up, they were hit with some ransomware, and like all ransomware, it spreads really fast, really quickly, and things within just a few minutes, things were being encrypted and locked up. But the nice part about the SQL part, though, was that because we had that high availability spread across multiple subnets that ransomware couldn't cross, the SQL Server environment didn't go down at all. Yes, the primary node was locked up, but the secondary node recognized that, and all workload was transitioned over to that secondary node. And so that's where in stage 4, where things become more strategic, you're looking at those types of benefits, right? So here's what it looks like if you graph it out for those that are mathematically minded. The maturity curve, the x-axis is the maturity level, and the y-axis going up and down is the business value or the resiliency of the environment. And so wherever you are, if you're in a reactive or managed or optimized, your goal now is to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to move to that next level? So let's do another quick poll. You can scan, it should pull right back up. Scan the QR code, should pull right back up. How much visibility do you feel like you have into the health of your SQL environment? Do you have a lot of visibility? You've got the tools in place. You have the people in place to take a look at it. You've got some, but there's still some areas where you're not so sure. Maybe there's some configurations that you're not aware of. Third is limited visibility with some crucial blind spots that at least you know you have. Or lastly, you don't know. You don't have any visibility as far as you know. All right. Looks like the majority are showing that there's some visibility that they have. All right, so we've talked about the 4 stages and what those represent, the cost and the potential risk that are associated with each of those stages. Let's talk about now how you get from one stage to the next. That's where this strategic roadmap comes into play. We're going to lay out, the practical path, the steps you need to take to go from where you are to where you want to be. So let's talk about how we move from stage 1, reactive, into stage 2, managed. So you're in a reactive mode now. That's where problems usually don't show up until things have already caused some pain. The outage, the compliance issue, the performance slowdown, things like that. So the goal here is to get ahead of that curve, to start building some foundational discipline and visibility into your environment so that you can begin recognizing those potential issues before they become events. So the very first step that I'd highly encourage you to do is to assign clear ownership within the organization. Someone has to be responsible for the health of your SQL environment. And that person should be an internal resource. Even if you work with an external company, an MSP, somebody like Sero Group that does the SQL servers, you need to have someone internally who is tasked with managing that, being responsible for that SQL environment. There's an old saying, thinking about a group effort, there's an old saying that if 3 people are responsible for feeding the dog's going to starve. You've got to have a single person responsible here. You also want to start setting up monitoring and alerts. And this is just going to give you some basic visibility into your infrastructure. You want to identify those potential issues before they become disruptive events. So you want to get a list of all your SQL servers, make sure that you know what their workloads are, what their patch levels are, and then start creating those basic, using basic monitoring tools to capture those basic events when they come in. Now, you'll still need to know how to address them when they do come in, but at least you're building that infrastructure, become aware of potential issues. You also want to introduce some discipline around your backup and recovery. It's not enough just to have backups running. They need to be verified and tested, and so that you know that you can depend on them when it counts. Same goes for patching. You need to have a schedule for patching on a regular basis, making sure that your operating systems and your SQL environment are up to date in patched on a predictable schedule. And finally, you want to begin looking at implementing basic security controls like the principle of least privilege. Identify who has elevated permissions within your SQL Server and adjust those if possible. You want to begin looking at auditing and separation of duties, things like that. And once you start putting those pieces in place, then SQL servers can begin running a little more predictably. There'll be fewer IT surprises that pop up, and you'll be able to see, you'll be better prepared for, regulation and examiners when they come. So to go from stage 2, where you're managing things, to stage 3, where you're looking and striving for optimization, the goal here is to introduce that efficiency and continuous improvement into your team, but also into your environment. So at the manage stage, things are predictable, fires have calmed down, but here we're looking at shifting more towards automation, right? We don't want people spending their time doing the same manual tasks over and over. Things like backups and testing the restores, those sort of things can and should be automated so that your team or your partners can spend time focusing on the higher value work. You also here want to begin performance monitoring, right? You want to introduce that proactive performance tuning. So instead of waiting for someone to call and say the SQL Server's slow, we can get ahead of that. We can start reviewing the workloads, the indexes, the most resource intensive queries before they cause problems that are noticeable to your internal or external customers. And this is especially valuable for banks that have in-house developed applications or data warehousing systems. We also want to begin looking at building out standardization so that every SQL Server follows the same basic build. Every SQL Server has a consistent set of maintenance plans, backup strategies, things like that, so that there's more predictability from one instance to the next. And we want to introduce a regular and rigorous assessment of the security and apply any remediations found. And so what we use is the CIS, Center for Internet Security benchmark assessment. It's part of the NIST process framework so that you can identify the maturity of both the operating system and the SQL environment, and then track it over time to make sure it's trending in the right direction. Finally, we get into this, for this stage, you want to begin looking at cost optimization. And that's really where things start to, it pivots from not just automation and predictability, but actually reducing costs, right? So we've had banks that have saved thousands of dollars a month just by trimming the excess capacity, cleaning up underutilized resources, doing a consolidation among others from multiple instances down to just a handful, things like that. So you begin looking at optimizing your costs and right-sizing your environment. And here's where the really good part comes, right? The path from optimized into strategic, right? That's the end goal for us. At this point, it's just not running effectively and efficiently. It's aligned with the bank's broader initiatives, with what the C-suite, and what the bank stakeholders are asking of the IT team, right? Is helping to drive decisions and innovation and even growth. And so there's that resilience by design that we talked about earlier. You have high availability, you have disaster recovery controls in place, you have strong security controls in place, and that allows you to then leverage the other initiatives like additional fintech integrations, additional APIs into your system for marketing applications. You can begin doing some real-time advanced analytics and reporting. Maybe you're shifting some of this stuff up into Snowflake, but you have the confidence that your internal structure can handle that export on a regular basis. Other things that your bank may already be doing, but maybe not. New mobile banking features, fintech integrations, all of those things are available. And the key part here is now with SQL Server being much more mature, being much more reliable and dependable, IT then no longer becomes viewed as a cost center only, but also now has a seat at the table and becomes a place where the resilience and the compliance actually pave the way for bank growth. So last poll for today. If you can invest in one area, which one would you prioritize? Strengthening and resilience and performance, improving compliance and security, optimizing costs and efficiency, leveraging data more strategically, or you've got something else? All right. That may be a tough one to answer. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on. So in a live session, this is where someone may ask, okay, all that sounds great, Joe. We want to move up the maturity curve. We know where we are. We know where we want to get to. But how do we begin? Where do we even start on this? That's a great question. I know it can feel like there's a whole lot to tackle, but the key is to knowing what to prioritize, right? So let's walk through a couple of tools that we can use, the prioritization framework and an implementation strategy framework that'll help you to decide where to focus your efforts so that you can make the most meaningful progress without overwhelming your team. So the first is the prioritization framework for SQL Server. The truth is not every issue can be fixed right away. So we've got to identify what our priorities are. Where do we want to spend the time and money and effort so that we're getting the maximum impact for what we're doing? So this starts with risk-based prioritization. That means tackling the things that carry the greatest operational or security or compliance risk first, because those issues are the ones that can hurt the most if they're not resolved. So that's almost always where we start with the clients that we work with. Next, we need to look at the resource constraint, right? Every bank has some sort of limitation. So you may have budgets to work within, you may have staff limitations, you may have bandwidth, a bunch of other projects are going on. So we need to line up here some quick wins that deliver the most measurable improvements without overwhelming your team. right? It's about building momentum and making things just a little bit better than they currently are. Next, we need to look at other timelines, right? So some projects are just time sensitive. Maybe there's a regulatory deadline that's coming up, or a vendor has a end of support date that's going to drive your timeline. Maybe there's some internal initiatives. You need to do this before you can get to that, and we've got to tackle it. Or maybe there's some business cycles that you need to be concerned with, or audits that are coming up, year-end processing. We also need to be aware of any dependencies. So means maybe we need to, before we get into tuning, we need to make sure that the SQL Server is configured correctly, or any other dependencies around, can this application be updated to a newer version of SQL Server? So we need to understand any other dependencies outside of just this one SQL Server or just the environment. And finally, we want to tackle the problems or the issues, the projects that are aligned with business initiatives, right? So we want to work to support whatever initiatives the bank has going on, and that could affect the timeline in the prioritization for some of this remediation. So all of these kind of helps to keep remediation from just being a technical cleanup or a series of tasks for technology's sake. Rather, it turns it into a more structured and more efficient business-aligned effort that moves the institution forward. Next, we need to look at the implementation strategies, right? So once we know our priorities, once we know what needs to be done, and we've got a priority list itemized to make sure that we're going to tackle the things in the right order, next we have to make sure that we determine what the implementation strategy is going to be. So some banks like having a phased approach, right? And roll out changes gradually, maybe tackle backups this quarter and patching next quarter and performance tuning the quarter after that. Maybe DR is a next year project down the road. It helps to spread out the effort across, the time, and makes changes easier to absorb, right? You're not getting too far out over your skis with your team on this. Others like to jump into it. Let's get all of this knocked out because we've got some great exposure that we need to clean up. Let's tackle it quickly, right? Another decision that you'll need to consider is whether to build your internal capacity or to leverage an external partnership, or maybe a combination of those, right? Building an in-house team obviously is going to strengthen your institutional knowledge, but that could be tough, right? Especially when SQL expertise is hard to hire and hard to justify for a lot of organizations. If they only have a handful, 5, 10, 15 SQL servers, it really doesn't warrant having a full-time person with that level of expertise, much less a team, right? And so that's where trusted partners like the Sero Group can come in and help accelerate some of that progress. So we can bring proven frameworks and project plans and best practices and deep SQL and financial industry expertise and experience, all while coordinating with your team, but taking some of the load off your team. And then finally, obviously, you need to work within change management. It's going to be especially critical. So you got to make sure that you're communicating with your stakeholders, communicating with your internal teams, timing it around audits, communicating with your examiners, and just working around any sort of other peak processing cycles that you have. So the big takeaway here is that there's not a single path that works for everyone. One bank's prioritization model and implementation strategy will be different than another institution's strategy and prioritization. But the key is identify what works with you, the path that you want to go forward, and leverage that, right? And when that happens, it's not just the SQL Server environment that's going to mature. It's going to be the entire capabilities and the staff of the entire team. So, some questions that I frequently hear as I'm talking with community and even regional banks, CIOs, CTOs, and so forth. Here's some common questions that come up. One is our core provider takes care of our SQL Server, so we don't have to worry about it, right? I do hear that a lot because frankly, that's what the core providers are telling the banks, right? But what we found is that core providers know their core systems very well. They know their applications very well, but they typically don't have the deep SQL Server expertise that is required for the resiliency and the proactive maintenance monitoring and so forth of a mature SQL environment. They're just not looking out for the SQL Server environment. They're looking out for their application. Second question we usually get, I haven't had any SQL problems, so I'm good, right? To that, I would say, the lack of visible issues doesn't mean that the environment's healthy. Doesn't mean that it's optimized. Just means you haven't had a problem. And you really don't want to wait until there is a problem to fix it. You want to get ahead of that curve before those bad things happen. Some of those bad things are really difficult to recover from. Another question we see is, I've got an internal person who's responsible for it. Absolutely, I'm glad. We sometimes call that part-time person who's responsible for the SQL servers in addition to all of their other work, an accidental DBA. And what we've seen is those IT generalists, the networking admin, the SAN admin, the cloud admin or engineer, they're all really smart people. They're great people. They know their stuff. But SQL Server is its own beast. And so while they may be able to manage the basics, it does require a different set of skills. Our MSP does it for us. MSPs are awesome. We work with banks that have MSPs. They're really strong in infrastructure. They can add a lot of value to the networking. They can add a lot of valuable insight to engineering. But frequently, they'll be the first to tell you that they're not, SQL Server is not their expertise. Nor do they want it to be. They tend to make sure that it's patched and backed up, at least at a virtual machine level. But they really don't get into the more to stages 2, 3, and 4, right? They'll help you get out of the break fix mode, but to get into to leverage the more advanced capabilities of the maturity curve, that requires more than typically what an MSP will provide. Last one that I hear frequently is, yeah, but we're a small bank. We just can't tackle this, right? In that, I get it, absolutely. But what we found is that, frequently those smaller institutions actually have a higher risk because they have smaller staff, fewer people, thinner margins for errors. They're spread awfully thin. They really need to tackle some of this and get ahead of, and get into the more mature areas of the curve. So, as we wrap up, key takeaways here: SQL Server, any sort of SQL Server immaturity can be costly, right? It's not just SQL Server is not just a technical platform. It's the foundation that your bank's most critical systems are on, right? And when that environment's immature, it goes way beyond IT. It shows up in dollars, it shows up in risk, it shows up in regulatory pressures, and sometimes even reputationally if things go badly. Second, the most community banks and regional banks are still operating in the lower levels, the reactive mode, rather than trying to get ahead and preventing a lot of these things. So the good news is you can begin implementing this and working your way up the maturity curve. Third is once you do that, once you begin moving up that maturity curve, that's where you can start experiencing some real and measurable results, not only in the decreased firefighting, the decreased reactionary mode of your organization, but you can also experience the reduced costs and the maturity of your IT team as you're moving up. And finally, success takes some structure, right? It means having clear priorities, having a practical implementation plan, and often the right partners to help fill in on the gaps and bring that SQL expertise where needed. So here's the bottom line. The sooner you start this journey from risk to resilience, the sooner SQL Server stops being that source of uncertainty that we talked about at the very beginning and can become that true business advantage for your organization. So as we wrap up then, final steps, next steps is we're going to make today's session available to you. You're going to receive a link to the presentation recording, so you'll have a copy of this. We'll also send you the a PDF of this presentation slide deck, so you're going to have all of that. I would also encourage you to download the SQL Server Maturity Curve checklist. That is the QR code on the right. Doesn't require any sort of, there's no gate there. You don't have to supply an email address or tell us who you are or give us a phone number or anything else. It'll take you right to the presentation, or I'm sorry, right to the checklist, 2-page checklist that will outline the steps to take to move you from one stage on the curve to the next. And finally, if this hit home, you'd like to have a little deeper conversation around this, I'd love to chat with you. You can schedule a free 30-minute consultation with us. We'll talk through your current environment, your priorities, where you want to go, any concerns you may have, and then we'll give you some recommendations tailored, towards what you're telling us, tailored towards your institution. And that'll be, you could set that up with the QR code on the left. Now, all of these things are designed to help you to start moving up the maturity curve right away, to reduce risk, to improve compliance, and to position your SQL Server environment as a true business enabler. And so with that, that is the last slide. Did we have any questions that came in along the way?
Joe, nothing up to this point. If anybody did have any questions, feel free to click on the Q&A module up at the top of the screen, and should be in your toolbar there, and you can enter in a question. We'll feel free to respond to those in the last few minutes of our call. But Joe, thank you. Thank you everyone who joined us today. We do hope that this session gave you a clearer view of how SQL Server maturity directly impacts your organization's security, compliance, and overall business performance. As you consider your next steps, the Sierra Group's here to help assess your current environment and chart a practical roadmap toward greater reliability and resilience. If you'd like to continue the conversation or schedule a follow-up consultation, please reach out. We'd be happy to discuss how we can support the goals using those QR codes that Joe just went over. Thanks again for your time today, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. I don't have any additional questions on the board, Joe.
Well, if something comes up later, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to reply and answer whatever questions you have. Thanks so much, everyone. Much appreciated.
Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.